The MiniMansioneerers and the Emerging Humanoids. Chapter 3. Molly Button had watched a very strange dance of her friend that she was visiting, and also his humanoid, simulating a robot dance with Molly's friend. She'd watched it all strangely, allured a little by it also. "Well, it is strange," Molly had admitted. "Yes, but I'm still learning to do the dances with him. It's taking me a long time to adjust to his program." "With it, surely you mean," corrected Molly. "After all, it's not a him, is it? It's just simulating a person, isn't it?" asked Molly. And Kit had gone on then to explain. The actual humanoid himself had said that he was actually a creation of some producers and writers, and also that his voice was actually a real author, and that it was the author himself who was narrating his own story, and also giving his own answers, his genuine answers to the actual questions, and that it was a combination of the script writers also working with the narrator together on their project that created the character of who he was. This is what the robot Kit explained. The humanoid simulation talk had been activated when Molly had asked the question, so that her friend, who owned and had rights to the humanoid at the moment, he didn't have to answer to Molly. He just said that he was going along with Kit's program, the humanoid's pre-installed programs that he already had when he bought it from the company, the simulator company, some months earlier. "Well, I know it's not really a person, just a simulation of a character of a person, really. It's the character that I've fallen in love with more, though. I suppose it's the author, the narrator, and well, the script writers, all of them, when they work together, it's the character that they all created and that he gave a voice to. So I kind of loved his voice, as well as the creator that he gave the voice to. So somehow I felt, yes, an attachment, but I know it's not to him, it's to the creation of him. His character was created by the scriptwriters and also by the narrator, who was one of the scriptwriters himself, and therefore he was part of creating his own character with the others who helped script him too, to some of the answers. They really helped to encourage his persona. I chose him from a catalogue. There were a list of loads of different personas, different simulators of personas, really. They simulate different kinds of personas. Oh, lots of different temperaments that they have. There's a whole catalogue of different ones you can choose from. Well, Andrew Joan Kit, he's really quite moderate in his ways, really. He gets a little angry, a little tempestuous, but he's quite restrained too. He's never too serious, but he's not too casual, in the things that he simulates, the answers that he simulates during the simulation conversations. This, Molly's friend had said to her as an explanation for his relationship, for the verbal as well as also the physical relationship that had developed between him and the humanoid Kit that he'd recently been getting to know much more. "Don't take this the wrong way, though," said Molly after finally considering it all. "But I shouldn't really want to dance or have a relationship only with a robot, or too much. I mean, surely you need to see people directly, in person. Don't you want to dance with people instead of having a simulated dance, with a simulated person? It's not really a real person, is it? Surely you'd want to dance with real people, have real dances," said Molly, trying to be as sympathetic as she could be after some consideration. "Oh, yeah, that's the ultimate goal, eventually," reassured her friend Jaden to her. "Kit's just really a temporary thing while I'm ill, when I'm not able to see people. It's really just a dance training program, just to get me used to dancing again, because I never had really. I never really danced sociably with others, so I'm awkward around other people. Don't know how to do it, never done it before. Or when I do try, people just laugh, or I bash into them, fall over. The amount of times I've spilt drinks down myself and others. Anyway, I just can't do it. So it was a good, reliable dance program to follow that I could do at home, so that I could learn how to do it, without offending other people, without just going too far with it, or, He restrains me and, it helps me to sort of work in a program. And I can't really find other people to do it. It's cheaper than a lot of dance teachers would be, because actually I can pay it off in installments, gradually. And if he's in good working condition, nothing's happened so far, touch metal, but then he could be returned and I'll get the deposit back afterwards. So, it will work out cheaper in the long run. And he's an expert dance teacher, even though he's only a programmed robot simulating the dances. He does some really difficult choreographed movements, although I haven't really gotten up to that level yet anyway. Jaden tried to reassure her, rambling on in his talk the way he often did. Well, if you're getting something out of it, I suppose it can't harm anyone. It's not hurting anyone anyway, rationalised Molly, shrugging her shoulders after some thought, not sure what to think of it, swilling the red wine around in the glass playfully, as if contemplating the red wine and not the deeper issues of it really. Unsure really yet, with such a new technology, what the social ramifications could be. For her, for others, this was the first time she'd ever really experienced a humanoid. Yes, she'd heard rumours, wild stories about other people in other worlds living with those things, but they lived far away, distant, remote parts of the island that few visitors ever returned with stories about. So she knew little about it, except the wild, rumoured stories. Never really any direct personal experience. She'd never knowingly seen a humanoid, although perhaps she suspected a few people at work seemed robotic. But then they were very robotic, mechanical kind of jobs to be doing. And out of work, they didn't seem so robotic. No, they loosened up and seemed more casual, more open then. Unless that was a greater simulation of doing it. No, she suspected a few people of having robotic tendencies, but never of being a full-time, full-on, fully fledged, thorough, robotic mechanical person, whatever that was, if there were such things. Yes, she'd heard a few had arrived in the mega mansion, their own small world, in recent times. Over the last few years, there'd been various reports about people having humanoid partners, experiments with humanoid therapy sessions, all manner of different things, but only very in limited capacities. Still, the cost of such new technology was still incredibly high, just way beyond the means of the average person. And it still wasn't something that was properly being done in any meaningful way. Not in this particular house, not in the world that they lived in. A house that was so vast that they spent most of their entire lives within. And the other houses, the vast mega worlds, they were a long distance away anyway. And trade between them was limited anyway, especially those that had really experienced a growth in the humanoid industries, in the technologies emerging in the last few years or so. That had dramatically accelerated, so the reports contested at least. Many of them attested at least to that. But she wasn't sure how discernible she could be in trying to understand how legitimate some of those were, perhaps, or not. She didn't feel well qualified to understand the technology, nor those other worlds that the reports had emerged from, places that she'd never visited, only heard of very remotely, knew of vaguely, but could describe little in depth about, though. Still, I don't think it's really harming anyone. I've not heard any bad reports here about it, whatever you might hear elsewhere. Still, I don't know much about it, Molly Buttons had said. She had reasoned, as long as you don't come to depend on it too much, I suppose, as long as it doesn't stop you going out to see others. But I can understand if you're already in. No, I have been at home a lot of the time. I just couldn't go out. That's what it was. Jaden tried to reassure her. It's because I couldn't go out and see with anyone. I couldn't dance with anyone or do anything. I haven't been able to in ages. Not since I've been off work, when the injury got worse over the months. Well, then it just seemed the ideal time just to try it. I heard about this humanoid, I don't know, a few years ago now. But actually, I didn't even know that they'd arrived here, that it was possible, really. Well, because of the cost and everything. It was an experimental treatment. That's what the doctor said at the market, really. He said you could try it out for a fraction of the cost, really. Just as part of some experimental procedure that they're trying out, really, to see what the social effects are. Because they'd had such mixed reports, from elsewhere. Well, maybe you don't know. I mean, I've studied that a little bit. There are a lot of reports that are good, some that are bad. It's really mixed, I think, really. Well, Down in the Megatronian worlds, the Megatron, loads of people there have tried it. I don't know, because it's so far away, you never know what to believe about there, right? Molly shrugged her shoulders. Well, she didn't know much about the Megatronian world. Had heard of it, of course, everyone had. But she knew little about it, really. That was a place just so far away, a vast, a greater distance than she could even imagine, really. Apparently, humanoids were common there. They could simulate more complex human behaviours and conversations too. They had only embraced the technology in the emerging last few years, and so reports there were sketchy. But still, they had a lot of more experience than in many other places, and certainly a vast amount more than in their present house that they lived within, their own mega mansion, that had little to no real knowledge. Certainly, the majority of people had no absolute knowledge or experience with any human simulator whatsoever. I must admit, I liked some of your dance moves. It was funny to watch, yes. It was actually kind of weird, but funny too, Molly had later confessed, saying that she did find it interesting, and also it was a little silly, but some of the dance moves were quite good. She urged him on. Maybe he could teach me a few. Well, if I got to know the programs. I don't know that I could do that well, to be honest. I mean, I am a lot shorter than you both, Molly had finally said. Maybe you're better suited to him, or suppose, Molly had said. Oh, but there's a catalogue of other similar kind of, model simulators. You choose one that would be different for you. Oh, no, said Molly. I wouldn't want to go to the cost of doing all that. I don't know anything about it. Too experimental for me. Besides, I'm not really technological enough. I struggle to operate a machine, the television alone, and the computer besides. They're a struggle and a trial enough for me. I don't think I could ever operate a humanoid. You'd learn in time, Jaden insisted. A simple humanoid. Anyone could do that. That's relatively simple. Now, of course, my kit humanoid, he's a bit more complex. That does take some training. But even after a few weeks studying the manuals, going through the remote controls, even then, after a while, just a few weeks, it's relatively simple. You'll pick up the basics. He's pre-programmed to do a lot of the more complex moves anyway. You just have to sort of know when and how to sequence them sometimes. And then you can adapt them in a little way. That takes a lot more programming. And there's all these manuals to wade through. Well, I'm hoping to do that a bit more because some of the programs, they're just not really adaptable to what I need always. He trailed off there, sort of looking over at Robo-Kit, still slumped in the chair, motionless, frozen, as if he was thinking and considering silently all of the conversation, sleeping through it, perhaps. But Molly still wasn't sure what to think about it all. She'd been hesitating, thinking about saying something, but then unsure, not wanting to be unfairly judgmental, and not knowing his position, or at least knowing he was quite lonely still. But yet, after hesitating, maybe he and Kit were both a little too tall for her to dance with or anything like that. Perhaps they were in proportion to each other and well suited. He'd obviously chosen one that he could relate to and adapt to, and that was a good physical size, especially for the physiotherapy, when he leant on him, depended on him, and was leaning on him for long periods of time, while he had to stand up for many hours to do the physical exercises, leaning on him to stretch the legs or the arms out, that had slowly adapted into moving with him, turning with him, and also to Kit holding on to him while he was able to move and do a variety of different sequenced moves. Yes, of course, it was partly physiotherapy, and he partly enjoyed it too, and that had morphed into a more pleasurable, enjoyable, synchronized dance that they'd morphed into. Still, it was a little fun, but she didn't know how far the dances perhaps had gone, and she wasn't too sure how much she wanted to ask about that either. Still, whether he would go out with Kit or not, she wasn't sure whether to ask any of that. It was a new humanoid situation, a new technological development, and one that had produced a new social dilemma, a dilemma that she didn't know the answer to, nor what to ask about it. She'd been saying, when he was well, maybe it would be different. Maybe then they could go out dancing together and she'd introduce him to other people that wouldn't be that judgmental around other weird dancers or awkward dancers. And they'd soon have a drink, loosen up, find people that they could dance with, or find a dance place that was more suitable to them, somewhere that they could dance happier in a few months or whenever the injury all heals up better. And she'd encouraged him, saying, eventually he'd find others that he could dance to and talk to okay and could adapt to easier. Could perhaps even take Kit out eventually. Who knows? People would be amazed at how real he looks and how real the dance simulations seem together. They could do it as a performance, she'd suggested, if there was enough room and space, if they found the right dance hall or venue. She'd suggested it, and turning serious, almost a little angry and abrupt, Jaden had shouted, "No, no," he'd said, repeating it twice, saying he didn't want Kit to go out dancing in public. He was worried about Robo Kit, the humanoid that was so rare and unusual in their own Mega Mansion world. Yes, it was normal and accepted in other places, but was still a taboo, was feared, and there was a great stigma attached to it in many other worlds, other places where it was instituted and had been long introduced. It had even been outlawed, criminalized, stigmatized, pathologized, seen as a mental disorder in many places still. Many other places it was accepted grudgingly or was hidden in an underground. There was a great taboo around it, and it was something that was belittled and laughed at, was joked and smeared at. He said there were a whole variety of mixed experiences when the phenomenon had been introduced in a whole variety of different worlds, of different mega-structured houses. Different places had reacted very differently to it. It was considered acceptable only in a variety, a small minority of the places. A larger amount of places accepted it, but with firm regulation, only if it was allowed in certain particular private places, and with good particular reasons to justify the needs for doing it as well. And there were also cost restrictions in many places, that only those that could afford to do it often could. And in those places where it could be prescribed, where there was deemed a legitimate social urgent need for that individual, where it was deemed to perhaps prevent some kind of harm, even then it wasn't accepted by the majority, and it was eyed as something weird, experimental, and strange. So, the experimental procedures of having the humanoids to interact with those that had emotional, physical, and mental problems to see that if it might alleviate some of their problems and might be a solution to allow them to engage more and experiment with engaging with a potential person, with a simulation of a person, with a view to encouraging them to going out to real people eventually. There had been a whole variety of different reactions to the humanoid phenomenon that had been introduced, that Jaden had explained some of the differences to Molly about, saying that there was a serious side to it, that not everyone in the past had really accepted all the humanoids because of the different types of experiments that had gone on, and the different types of humanoids and their owners and friends that there were still. That people could react to it very differently, in fact. That he was worried, of course, about other people's reactions. People could think it was too weird or pathetic and sad and stupid or crazy, mental, as well as something that could be interesting, inspiring, thoughtful, and something that could even be beneficial, and something that could both serve him and other people and have some entertaining function about it, something that's not just a curiosity and a little educational, and perhaps could actually be a simulation that could be informative, but that they could learn something from it too, and perhaps even enjoy it sometimes. That the androgynous relationship, the new humanoid relationship, the simulated complex relationship could add some value to the other human relationships too, complementing them rather than just necessarily replacing them or conflicting with them even. It could be something that could be a complementary benefit as well as having potential risks too, though not everyone would see either the potential benefits nor those risks necessarily, not without having experienced time with other humanoids and time with other people that had known and studied, worked with, programmed, and also adapted to the humanoids themselves. People were limited in their knowledge and experience with such new, advancing, emerging technologies. that would have social consequences potentially, and emotional, psychological consequences too, that would still be profoundly unknown. That whilst they might be known in their consequences to some varying extent, and even debated and contested elsewhere, but still that was elsewhere under very different social circumstances, in very different far-flung social environments, under different climates, in different theological, psychological conditions, with different friends and different families, in different workplaces, in completely different environments. So it would be still in a place that was a humanoid virgin territory. It would still be another new humanoid experiment. Whatever the good, bad, happy, sad, and mixed experiment results there had been so far in the vast amount of other humanoid experiments in the different megastructure worlds. There was this mega mansion and all the other giant and smaller mansions too. All the different mega and smaller worlds scattered throughout the vast worlds had all had different reactions and a whole kaleidoscope of different phenomenal reactions to all those different humanoid experiments. Well, he wasn't sure whether he would take the humanoid kit. He really didn't know because there were so many different risks that he needed to calculate of, as well as those potential benefits too. And of course, there was the value of Kit, the humanoid himself. His financial value, of course, because he'd been hired out and they had to pay the deposit that would only be returned if he was returned himself to the simulator company in a reasonably good condition, as he'd been hired out originally for, in that same similar condition. There was a risk to something happening to him, although he was fairly strong and sturdy, but still there was a small risk that something could deflate the value of him if he could potentially be seriously damaged when out. Someone could even abduct him to steal him and go off with him. So it was a financial risk as well as also an emotional risk. It could be an embarrassment to him as well, and people could laugh and think if the experiment went wrong, people could think he was crazy perhaps, and it would be a laughing stock in public or something, a deep shame and embarrassment even, if it was discovered perhaps during the performance, whilst he was doing the simulated dance with Robo Kit. Perhaps Kit might malfunction or that something might happen, and then people might discover it was a simulated robo dance and that he was dancing with a robo partner doing a simulated dance and not knowing what people's reactions and fearing what they would be. He would need to do a very careful, programmed dance with him first and have rehearsed it many times to a reasonably good standard to be comfortable before he would ever go out to do that, and to know the place and the people, typically how they might likely react, to do it somewhere that was more open-minded, liberal, and might be more likely to be understanding and considerate for it. Something that he would consider doing, perhaps with some research, he'd said. When he was outside, though, it was in unknown places. Perhaps there would be meeting unknown people, too, with unknown conversations that couldn't be predicted and couldn't be known. He'd yet to learn what that would be because he'd not taken RoboKit out yet himself, had just been working on and with him together at home in the room alone. So he couldn't really simulate to know, couldn't program to know, or adapt the programs to know how him and RoboKit would cope, how he would cope with the humanoid whilst out with other people in the unknown situations with unknown people. No, RoboKit would stay at home in the house for now while he was still learning more complex moves with him, still learning about it, about the most basic things with him still. As they were still experimenting together with the many simple programs he was learning to use within the more unknown confines of the personal room. They had become much more known to RoboKit as he learned to adapt his own movements, simulating the various programs he already had, adapting them to the restraints within the room, with his own movement sensor that he had to adapt to the objects and also to Jaden himself. The objects in Jaden that could be moved, that had to be adapted to. Molly had nodded to all this, really shocked and surprised at all of it. She'd also been shocked when he'd got a little angry at just the idea and been so worried about poor RoboKit being taken out. The fact that he was so concerned and went to great length to explain his concerns for RoboKit, concerned about what would happen to him as much as himself. She saw that he was acting so protective over the humanoid, seemed to be so concerned for him. And yet she seemed to be worried about this somehow, and offered a sympathetic smile back to Jaden, saying when he was well enough to travel again, to go much further, and to go out, perhaps he could then leave Kit behind. Leave the humanoid at home, perhaps, just for a while, and then just go out with her and a few others. They could go out and do their own dance together. And then he could just do his practice dance with RoboKit at home occasionally. Just do the slow dances with him or it, and then do the other dances that he'd learned with someone else. And that they could just have fun doing it that way. And that he didn't have to take the humanoid RoboKit out at all. Even if they were ill-suited to be dance partners, he could still learn to adapt eventually, and have a robo-dance at home that helped teach him and loosen him up and learn how to do different moves, and then he could try those out when he met up with her and some of the other colleagues. When they went out occasionally for the group night out. Every month or so they did it, and, well, she didn't go often herself, but she'd make an effort to go along with him, and they'd meet other people that went to other nights, potentially. And then he could try out some of those robo dance moves with them and the others that he'd surely meet there. She tried to say encouragingly, imploring him that he didn't have to robo dance alone, just with RoboKit all the time. He could use the moves he'd learnt with it to go out and dance with the others. And that they could all just have fun together. She'd prefer it that way, she'd said. Even if they were ill-suited, perhaps, to dance with his robo-dancing that he'd been learning. Jaden agreed, yes, it was a possibility to do that, something to aim for. If and when he did finally get better, and he was able to move more, because actually he had to slow down a lot of the dances, because the injury was playing up, and was still quite bad sometimes. So he had to stop that, and just rely on the simulated conversations much more, really. And more some of the simulated physiotherapy for RoboKit to support him, doing his own physical exercises too. And he said he could probably learn a lot more from her and the other dancers, as well as learning from RoboKit also. When he was able to go out more, yes, he would like to do that, he'd agreed. He'd apologised when he was mentioning her age, saying he was sorry that he felt that she was a lot older to dance with, because he did say things abruptly without thinking sometimes. He felt that she was too old to be a dancing partner for him, potentially, though. And she'd laugh, saying, no, she meant that he could dance with her and a few of the other colleagues. They danced together, not romantically, her and him, more just dance as friends, dance partners with the others. They'd all gone a dance night out, as colleagues, together, at work. After work, she'd assured him, saying, oh no, of course, they were too old for romantic partners. She hadn't meant suggesting that they go out to dance together, like that. Just more that they go out for friendly dance and a little drink and a chat, she'd said to him, trying to reassure him. She wasn't offended that she thought she was too old to be a dance partner, but never too old to be a friend, she'd reassured him. And she wasn't too old to dance, even though she didn't stride around or leap about the place or bend over or do cartwheels or great twirls or anything too dramatic. No, she just had her own simple moves that she did. A little 1-2 side steps back and forth, a little shuffle here and back. No, but she'd like to do her own little shuffle dancing, and just to have a little fun, and that sort of thing, and that they could do it together with a few of the other colleagues on a night out. And she'd smile, try to reassure him, saying, no, she wasn't offended at all about him saying that she was too old to be a dance partner, that she wasn't really a dancer, she was more of a shuffler, and he could do his robo-dancer, and she could shuffle, and some of the others could dance around with a mop, and somebody could dance around a handbag, and it would all be okay still, and no one would think they were all a bunch of weirdos struggling to fit in or anything. After Kit had programmed to do some more funny dances, and he did some other mimes too, that had been set up by the simulator company, but had also been adapted by Jaden. He'd added a few of his own sillier moves, but they didn't seem to fit in quite well, just because he wasn't so good at doing the complex programming himself. Some of those dances were just silly dance routines, a few twirls and a few silly bows and some hand gestures too. Some that were a little rude and made them both laugh a little though, but they were just funny and humorous really. Molly, though, after 5 or 6 minutes of the funny dancing, parading around, stretching the legs, bending over, and just doing a few larking around dances, after some while of this, she'd long since stopped laughing, though, and she turned a little serious after a while, contemplating it all, suddenly finding it a bit bizarre, a bit strange, a bit too strange, that here she was, sat with a middle-aged man, Jaden. I mean, a colleague from work, a friend that she was visiting. She was a bit concerned about him, although not too concerned. It seemed fun, and it was a physiotherapy, something that he'd relied upon for the physical exercises to do that had changed and become more pleasurable, an experiment that was fun, something that was interesting, something he was learning to do, to program it, and something that he was getting some benefit from. It didn't seem that bad, but suddenly she seemed a bit odd, felt a bit strange, seeing him doing some weird seductive dance, something that was a bit flaunty, a bit too playful, a bit seductive almost. Some of the playful dance moves were just a bit cheeky, a bit humorous. Not too much, though. Just a little risque, but nothing too much. But it felt odd. Sat there with a young man, a young middle-aged man, who seemed to be laughing at it. He didn't seem that aroused by it. Neither was she, really. It was more saucy, risque, a little playful, humorous, really, funny. But then again, it seemed to be watching a young man, in his mid-twenties and that, doing a little erotic dance, a little playful, and her, an older woman, sat there with a middle-aged man, both laughing at what seemed to be a simulation of a young man. It did seem odd, not distasteful, because he'd not done anything that offensive, or that sexualized, or that weird, nothing that provocative even, just a little suggestive. But still, it didn't sit totally easily on her. It felt a little odd, a little strange, but she wasn't sure why, or whether it was okay. Then RoboKit, the humanoid, the young simulated image of a man, then did a can-can dance, with his long legs striding out, kicking out on either side, at some distance from them both, where he kicked his legs out in synchronism, first to the right, then to the left, back and forth. He went going forwards and swizzling round, twirling this way and that, swizzling his legs out, long strides back and forth, kicking his legs out, and doing a little curtsy after the performance even. She found it quaint, curious, odd again, but it was relatively a little less entertaining. She found it strange. Yes, he'd not revealed too much of himself, was fully dressed, had shorts on at the time, with his synthetic skin underneath, the simulation clothes, of course, perhaps, or perhaps those were real clothes in any case, but the synthetic skin that appeared to move when the synthetic legs had appeared to kick back and forth as they did. It had felt a little odd, though, for her. But still, she watched RoboKit, dressed in his manly clothes. He had a long dark shirt on overneath, with the jean shorts on, and with leather boots on underneath and socks pulled up, with hairy synthetic skin. No doubt they weren't real hairs or real skin at all, though, just synthetic fabricated material that looked like it, of course. Essentially, it looked the same, moved the same too, even though it was all fabricated. A very good aesthetic rendition of it, very articulated, very simulated. It was very specific and looked exacting almost. Perhaps forensically, if you probed and studied deeply at the microscopic material, perhaps there was some materialistic differences under the microscope, but to the naked eye there was no difference whatsoever. It appeared to be a young man doing a little erotic dance for them both, a little teasing, a little fun, and then doing a turn at the end of it all before silently stopping, going back to being a silent statue, motionless once more. He had exposed what appeared to be little hairy arms as well as legs, although they were quite long arms, really, but only some of them could be seen, what with his long leather shorts on. Leather dark blue shorts that matched the blue top that he was also wearing. He was quite a handsome featured young man as well, with well-defined, chiselled-out faces, with well ears and nose that were in proportion, dark brown eyes that were almost tortoiseshell, dark browny green, perhaps looking at them closely, a little alluring in their look too. Yes, he looked kind of ruggishly handsome, in a youthful kind of way, though. But he had a kind of hard, cold stare about him too, Molly thought, staring at the motion statue of Robo Kit after he'd finished his pre-programmed dance once more, appearing to stop in the middle of the room, in front of them, some meters apart, so that he hadn't been kicking them, just kicking the space before them, really, kicking out in either direction, as he twizzled and twirled around the room. A cold, hard stare, yes, thought Molly, as he was staring out lifeless at them both. A little like a statue, really. A mechanical statue, perhaps, that occasionally burst into life, with great sequences of movements that somehow were odd because he seemed to flow for a while and sort of have a sequence where he was sort of flowing okay, and then he'd jolt and stop, and then abruptly would then do a different kind of sequence movement that didn't really relate to the last thing. A kind of awkward, altered, jolty movement. A syntax where things didn't quite relate, that somehow left you a little weary, estranged, a little mystified, unsure what to think about it, really. As if it made sense, and then suddenly didn't, and then made sense again. And it felt on off for a while like that, where RoboKit's movements for a while made sense, and then he did something that looked weird, something that wasn't human-like, or that was, but just didn't fit with the behaviour that he'd just done. But she couldn't have expressed all that quite clearly at the time to Jaden. Only later did she really clearly think about it, and was able to express it more clearly, when she'd had time to think about it more fully. And that's all you do then, I guess, with it. Just the robo-dancing, the dance programmes, more than the physiotherapy and all that, had asked Molly Buttons to her young friend, Jada Marshall. Both sat now in the chairs, opposite the washing machine, with that serving as a table that had long ago stopped swirling around the clothes and had long ago stopped rumbling the glasses on top of it. Yeah, that's pretty much it, Jaden had finally said, after a long pause and a clear hesitation, Molly had thought, as if he was weighing up what kind of answer, how far to go with it, how much to confide with her. She'd studied young Robo-Kit's youthful, young, pleasant face. Yes, he had a young beautifulness, a smoothness to his texture. He was light bronzed, Mediterranean. She was wondering if his other body parts looked like the rest of him, kind of wildly haired, a little kind of roguish, because he was quite long and had big hair that was a little wild for him, but not too wild. It was kept in some places, a middle parting, a sort of wild tangle of a fringe. It was sort of handsome looking in a way, though. All of the outer layer was, of course, synthetic flesh, nothing real, although it was all good simulation flesh and bones. To touch it and the feel really felt real as well, though. And she'd examined some of the legs on the first initial occasions, squeezing in with her fingers. Yes, it had exactly the same feel as a person, a good simulated synthetic bone structure to it as well, that moved mechanically exactly like a person would too. Or at least it simulated many of this person's simpler movements, not quite all of the complex ones. No, it couldn't do that, though Jaden assured us some of the more complex humanoids, they could, some of them, although his own humanoid kit program could not yet do those things. Jaden, though, hadn't answered the question fully, not straight away, about how much he did, what he quite did with RoboKit. Yeah, it's pretty much just the dancing. That's mostly what we do, really. Pretty much? Asked Molly. Well, what else do you do with it? She asked, persisting, raising the eyebrows. Well, it's just the dances, really, and the physiotherapy exercises that led into the dancing. So it's mostly just that, really. I mean, he comes pre-programmed with a lot of those dance programs. So that's mostly what he is able to do, really. And I fit around the dance programs, tweak and twerk them a little. I can only adapt them a little because it's such complex programming. I can't do much to his pre-programmed dances and the pre-programmed talking that he does. The simulated conversation, the one you tried doing with him earlier. I know it didn't go that far with him, but I can't really do that much in adapting it. I just have to work with whatever the simulated project he has already within it, whatever the program is. finally Jaden had said, trying to correct and explain himself. Does he actually do anything more than that? Said Molly, who'd drunk quite a lot now and was really unsure still what to make of it all. I mean, is it just the dancing that he does? And the physio, the therapy exercises, leaning on him or having his arm out to support you when you're doing the stretching or the lifting or the different turnings and all that, all those exercises that you showed me that you have to do the physio for. Yeah, a lot of it is that. I mean, there's a lot of different programs that are catered that could be adapted to do those things. And a lot of the dancing things, if you put them on pause or freeze it just on a few of his kind of different moves in mid kind of dance, then you can sort of adapt it to doing that. Yeah, I can have him in sort of standing up position. If you have the posture, he has so many different positions you can adjust. Those parts are easy. There's multiple postures that you can put him into if you just want it to lean on for support. That's easy enough. And then to have him just doing a few simple moves so that he's there holding you, pushing you to the side, lifting the leg up slightly, or sort of lifting the whole body up to one side so you can sort of stretch further. Those are the programs that he came with anyway. So I chose it originally just for those physiotherapy needs, really, so I could fit in with those moving programs that he had. A lot of those are just simple physio programs. Only a few of those, the ones you saw, are really more complex dance programs. There's not a lot more that he can do, really. Yeah, it's mostly just the physio programs, some stretching programs, stretching support programs, and those dance programs, the ones I showed you. They're just the simple ones, really. There's not a lot more than that, really, that he can do. There's a few basic cleaning programs. He puts things away, but I don't, there's not much push. It's just moving a mop back and forwards. He can hold things and push it back forwards, lift things up and down, open things back and forth. Those simple kind of movements. He has simple programs, so he can do those things okay, said Jaden, going on after a second glass of red wine. He was still a little drunk at the time with it. Oh, he does clean then. At least he cleans and can put things away. Well, you don't really have a lot to clean. I mean, you've not got a big space here, said Molly, looking around at the limited compact spaces, the few cupboards that there were stacked above the bed, and then the few sideboards that there were underneath the bed too, that was on the middle shelf stacking bed layer, between various cupboard layers and various other layers that had a study underneath one. You haven't got much need for much cleaning or any of that kind of thing. Got nothing much to put away, have you really? Asked Molly. No, but I don't really use them for that. It's easier, really, for me to just do that. Exactly. So it's more for the physio programs and the dance program. That was just an additional thing, really, just for fun. But it was really just for the stretching, supporting programs. I mean, that was really more what I originally got it for. The fact that it had other dance programs as well, that was more of an additional bonus. It was just something extra, something that was more fun to do as well, really. So, it was good just to work with that, I suppose. But yeah, I don't need it for the cleaning program because that's so easy for me to do anyway. It's harder for me to actually program him around, have him stood in the right place and everything kind of out in front of him. And it takes a lot of there are a lot of more complex sequences actually involved in just ordering like a really simple kind of program. You've got to put loads of different complex sequences just together to make a really simple program of that. So it's actually more complex. So I just do those things myself, really. It's easier. Even when I'm sober, I struggle to work as real like programming and a lot of the complex commands in it. It's really complicated. I've got to be really focused to do that. When the pre-programmed ones go on, then I got to just focus on moving myself around him so I can sort of make sure that I'm actually doing the exercises so that I can then depend on him moving during his program through it. So I'm so focused on me doing it that I can't then adapt his program during it. So I've got to have him pre-programmed and know what that is. And I've rehearsed it. So I rehearse those things a lot of the time. I do it multiple times. So I'll know exactly what his program moves will be next. Because I've done it so many times with it before. And so I could just do the same old physio routine. It was dependable having his routines like that but those were just simple. And so it took a lot of time to adapt those, to learn how to adapt anything, to sequence him, and to sequence his actual programs more complex, to do any of the dances. I can't program my own dances, could never do any of those. They were all pre-programmed. So I just adapted and tweaked a few of them, Actually, I probably made some of them worse. I don't know really. Because they were so well pre-programmed, the sequences in them, so hyper complex. I could never hope to do that really. I know nothing about technology, programming, or about science. Or I didn't train in mechanics and electronics or computer studies anyway. So I just follow a very simple manual that is just how to operate the simple programs of it, really. How to sequence them, the different programs, to create your own sort of program that basically puts together all of the pre-programs in a more complex sort of way. Jaden had said it all drunk, trying to explain once more to Molly, going on almost as if to divert away from the line of questioning that they'd been on before, perhaps, Molly had suspected. But she didn't want to suggest that to him, looking over the big stack of the computer manuals that he'd been looking through, although there were really only a few pamphlets that were out and had all been creased and had scribbled writing all over them, as if he'd been holding, creasing and studying them so much over the months.